Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk a little bit about the book of the impact of political economy on character formation. It's interesting that when we invited participants to take part in this project and contribute chapters to the book, I remember I asked Professor Welker, shall we give them a definition of political economy? Because unlike the other social systems, education, law, health, it's very clear what you talk about. Political economy, it's a little bit difficult. And wisely, because of his experience in these things, he says, if we invite good people, it will emerge from the work. And although no specific definition or demarcation was provided up front, it does, this is my construction, it does emerge from the different contributors that late modern pluralistic societies are marked by a political economy of liberal capitalism. In this case, the word liberal refers to a democratic political order marked by the rule of law, which ensures the protection and enhancement of civil liberties like freedom of expression, freedom of movement, and freedom of association. Capitalism refers to a system of exchange via the free market, with some intervention by the state to set the broad rules of exchange and ensuring fair competition. First part of this book is about the interrelation among the social systems. As in the case of other social systems, it emerged from the chapters in this book that it is almost impossible to discuss political economy without an understanding of the integration and interdependence of different social systems. Several contributors argue, I think convincingly, that no society that pursues the common good would be possible unless there is some communication between political economy on the one hand and other social systems like law, education, and religion. This is not something new. This is exactly the assumption behind this whole project. The precondition for discussing the communication of values in political economy in tandem with these other systems is that each of these systems should be interpreted not from a positivistic standpoint, but as systems directed at moral ends based on specific underlying values, which is also clear from the introduction that Professor Welker and John wrote for each book. For example, economics defines and sustains human welfare, the law ensures order and justice, education builds character, as we just heard in the previous session, and religion motivates the goodness of the world. So in terms of Luhmann's autopoietic social systems, the communication and the reciprocal influence of political economy with systems like law, education, and the market are very, very important. I didn't know that this session would come after the previous one, so when I prepared, I said it's clear in the political economy book that all the contributors say for the political economy to function well, it needs a communication, it needs an education system that supports the kind of values that we would like in a democratic order. So we just saw that in the previous session. The second issue from this book, there are only 4, is framing the political economy from an ethical perspective. We had 2 very interesting chapters by Andreas Gläser, who is present here. He will say something more tomorrow, and my colleague from Stellenbosch, Amanda Gous, who is in a granted chair for women's studies at Stellenbosch University. And we put those 2 chapters first because we wanted to say the rest of the chapters, to which I will refer now, is framed in a way by a kind of ethical consideration. Let me start with Professor Gläser's chapter. The focus on institutions as mediators of value over and above personal character formation is very important. The Kantian question of what I ought to do should be augmented and expanded to include the question about what assemblage of good institutions we need to form to ensure the communication of values in a political economy. Good institutions in late modern democratic societies, he writes extensively, should at least demonstrate transparency, alterability, that means the potential to make changes to the system, and embody a comprehensive vision of a good life and a good society. And colleagues, when the Nobel Prize for Economics was announced this year, I immediately thought of Professor Gläser, because they got their prize for showing that progress in nations happened, not because, I read here from the citation, why are nations successful? It is not down to climate, as sometimes argued, not geography, not culture, but because of institutions. Drawing on an extraordinary range of contemporary and historical examples from ancient Rome through the Tudors to modern-day China, these Nobel Prize-winning economists show that it is sound institutions that allow virtuous circles of innovation, expansions, and peace. And when I mentioned this to Professor Glaser, I said they should have given the prize to you, because you already wrote this of you. And then he made the remark that, you know, sociologists normally think these things out, but then the prizes go to the economists. I don't know why. A second ethical view was from Amanda Gous. Her chapter is The Feminist Ethic of Care, based on her idea that late modern pluralistic societies in some respects show the distortion of liberal capitalism towards what she called, a term widely used, new liberalism, with its excessive focus on self-referential individualism, independence, competition as a means of progress, and in her case, very important, the commodification of care. These stand in direct contrast to values like reciprocity, interdependence, and responsiveness, which enable the building of a humane political economy. These latter values make up what one could call an ethics of care. And this care is not only applied to individuals, but also to caring institutions, a caring state, and for that matter, us as human beings caring for the planet, planetary care as part of a holistic vision of an ethics of care. The qualification of an ethics of care with feminist is to highlight the power asymmetry between the genders still prevalent in most democratic societies, where freedom and the enjoyment of freedoms are not equally distributed between different genders, even if we interpret it in broader than simply the binary sense of men and women. Care is most often relegated to unpaid work done by women. Many of them are guest workers, and this is not recognized for its value and its contribution to the economy. Instead of fostering what she calls precarity, one should strive for an inclusive ethics of care against which we can then measure the quality of our political economy. The third part of the book deals with an evaluation of liberal capitalism. And here a dissensus arose. And tomorrow Prof. Bittner will have a chance perhaps to speak a little bit more about it. And the reason is his paper, he argues that there is no ethos in liberal capitalism itself. It is a morally neutral system of exchange that regulates the allocation of resources. It is not the system itself that is at fault, but rather people with the freedom to choose and who sometimes select morally wrong paths of action. Prof. Bittner said, yes, we may critique liberal capitalism, for instance, for its inequality or ecological devastation, but that should not be directed at liberal capitalism itself, but rather against the abuse of the system by people with the freedom to make choices. An interesting philosophical point. Two case studies that I put in the book directly after Prof. Bittner's claim, I think are critical of this. One is an analysis of the global financial crisis, 2007 to 2010, that demonstrates the devaluing of virtue based on an amoral or non-normative view of markets in which the maximization of shareholder return is accepted as the main or sometimes the only measure of success. The remedy to this kind of political economy that had disastrous global consequences lied in education, empathy, the kind of idea of care, setting proper examples, and obviously making sure that the state enforces the rules in line with the law. The second chapter that is critical of at least one good example of ethics go wrong was Jonathan Cole's analysis of Twitter. And that was before my South African colleague. He's now an American citizen, so I don't need to worry. Elon Musk, he was in South Africa, but he's now American. Yeah. He bought Twitter and he called it X. This was before Jonathan's book. But Jonathan already at that point said, although Twitter is a communication platform that purports to promote open democratic communication. It is in fact structured and designed in such a way that it contributes to the malformation of human character. And you should read this chapter where he says, what is the marks of civil human communication? For instance, that I know who I'm talking to and I cannot hide behind anonymous things, because that creates a certain sense of social responsibility which is then absent from Twitter. It does this via the subversion of norms that guide constructive human communication. The Twitter case study highlights the fact that human communication is a key factor in building a sound political economic system. The contradiction in this case, is interesting, is between a digital advertising company. Jonathan says Twitter or X is actually not a communication tool, it's an advertising company. And it actually gets higher returns from uncivil and anti and asocial communication. The reason is simple, because people click on that more times and therefore the revenue goes up. In that way you reward financially antisocial or asocial or uncivil human communication. In that sense then, liberal capitalism has an example of how things can go wrong. The last part of the book deals with the very interesting point of how do you navigate state power. It is agreed that the state is responsible for law, protection of freedoms, formation of moral habits, mostly through the education system, and providing exemplary leadership. The question then arises, how should people respond to the abuse of power to the point of establishing a tyranny, sometimes by exactly abusing the freedom afforded in the democratic system? This is a very tough question. We look at Hungary, we look at Georgia, we look at America, we see you use the freedoms of the system to undermine the freedoms in the system. A very difficult question. 2 chapters in the book responds to this by distinguishing between soft force and hard force in response to tyrannical state power. One of the most important instruments for guiding state power in free political economic system is the Constitution, or a similar founding document upon which the state is built and from which it draws for the development of law and the exercise of political power. The case study on the public funding of private Christian schools in the United States by Chapman demonstrates the route towards soft force. So what you do is, when you observe the abuse of the democratic system, you use democratic means to resist that system. In this case, you call on the Constitution. But even here it is clear that constitutionalism does not necessarily present an amoral or neutral dispute settlement instrument. John, I think you would agree with this, because it is itself founded on certain values. That makes the call on issues like funding private Christian schools a very difficult one, because of the incommensurability of the strict secular assumptions against a kind of Christian view of education. A review of the Lutheran Revolution, John Witte, specifically the Magdeburg Confession from 1550, later followed by the Peace of Augsburg, clearly showed that when the state abuses its power by limiting freedoms, transgressing the boundary of your conscience, and not allowing due process for you to raise your dissatisfaction, then sometimes hard force, taking many forms from civil disobedience to physical self-defense, might be the only option. I now end off with the conclusion, and this is not in the book. When Michael asked me to prepare something, I said, what can I learn from the book if I would like to see whether democracy is under threat? And I must say, I'm very touched by this. I think there's a richness in this book that tells us the story. And I will just mention them. You're all intelligent people. It's late in the afternoon, but let me mention them. There are 6 things. If you see any one of them, or in combination happening in your society, you must know that the idea of a democratic civil order is under threat. Firstly, when democratic institutions are undermined or weak. It normally starts with the media, control over the media, and control over the legal system. So when democratic, Professor Glaser's argument, when democratic institutions are undermined or weak, you're in trouble. Secondly, when the system is not informed by a broad consensus about an ethic of solidarity, the care for people. specifically those that are weaker in society. When cooperation among social systems break down or they overtly contradict one another, so that your legal system and your education system and your economic system do not speak the same language, then you get confusion and, in a way, social disorder. Coming from South Africa, I understand this one. When powerful individuals set bad moral examples, they abuse their political power, but instead of creating exemplary examples, they create an atmosphere in which the broad populace agree to stuff like corruption or whatever the case might be. Fifthly, when human communication goes into a downward spiral of uncivility, and you can see that in political communication very easily. I've seen that in Africa quite a few times. When you call your political opponents hyenas or dogs, what you do is you dehumanize them with a language, and then you can kill them, because they lose their status, as it were, as full human persons. By naming them, you're dehumanizing them, and in that way your communication becomes the basis. And words are very, very powerful. Let me not tell you about Rwanda. Let me not tell you about South Sudan. Let me not tell you about northern Mozambique, where these things happen all the time. It's a reality. And lastly, the moment the state starts to overstep, and they normally try and do this, overstep the boundaries of its power. When the political system tries to tread outside of its confines set by the Constitution and the state, and try and impair the sovereignty of other spheres of society. But let's be positive, and I conclude. If these things are turned around, where these values in the positive sense are promoted and protected, the chances to establish and secure the public or the common good within the political economy of late modern societies seems to be enhanced. Thank you very much, Michael.